now so they can, and we are now live. Let me just check 1 second and get back.
We are getting ready and we are starting. Is it okay for everyone? Okay. Lelin, you can go.
Hayır değil.
Hayır,
Çünkü
hayır,
çeviri
hayır.
için gerekli düzenlemeyi yapmadınız. Pardon.
Ha, okay.
Çeviri modunu açmanız gerekiyor. Sonra da 2 kişiyi, maillerimiz sizde var, çevirmen olarak atamanız gerekiyor. 2 aşamalı bir işlem yapılması lazım.
Tamam, tabii ki de biliyoruz. Bir saniyenizi rica edeceğiz.
They're assigning roles quickly and then we can start. I feel like we're going into space. This is like requiring so much focus.
Also by Tesla.
Yeah. It would be a nice space shuttle selection.
Lelin, you can start.
All right. Hello, everyone. For those who are just tuning in, we're now live. Welcome to the second panel of Future Tellers Digilog series in collaboration with Zorlu Performing Arts Center and the Istanbul Foundation for Culture and Arts. This is Lalin here, and at Digilog, we've been working on curating a series focusing on societal change in creative industries for the past few months, just because the year 2020 represented us with such major habitual disruptions. And now exactly 6 months into this challenging period, not only the coronavirus pandemic, but also the preceding global transformations that happened over that time span, we can say that this particular time frame is now engraved in our collective mind space. And enough time has passed so that we can make sense of its implications and the actions that we've taken as an industry slightly better, if not at all. New and modified creative processes, solutions for the problems that we were faced with in terms of workforce, space, digitization, and finances are all experiences we've been through and still are going through them. So communities impacted at the same time with different responses have a lot of potential for growth. And this is why, as Digilog, we're still hosting discussions to hopefully circulate these learnings, and they can turn into potential resources for people or whomever that might need them. I know myself and the panelists here for the past 6 months have been in constant dialogue with each other, with other networks, tirelessly trying out different scenarios to get it right, running it by each other, sharing documents, sharing presentations, and we can all say that it's a constant effort to try to figure out what lies before us in the future, or even to make sense of what's happening now. But we also believe it's important to keep on exploring, and that these explorations are transparent and accessible to those who are in need of these answers, or their livelihood depends on the actions taken by us, such organizations, and its implications. We have a team working solely on creating these dialogues and discussions into resources and to reports, which will be translated in both languages and shared alongside our platforms. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have Barry Through, Executive Director of Gray Area San Francisco, Olof van Winden, Founder and Director of the Today's Art Foundation and Festival in Netherlands, Jose Luis Nicente, Head Curator for Sonar Plus D Creativity and Technology Platform, Barcelona, and Vera Ballo, Director of Stochastic Labs, Berkeley, California. Welcome, all of you, and thank you for accepting our invitation to be here. And before we begin the discussion, I'd like to offer a little context on why we've invited them for this particular panel. For those who are just getting to know them or haven't met them before, or the institutions that they are representing now, Gray Area, Today's Art, Sonar Plus D, and Stochastic Labs have many decades of experience in regards to building communities around creativity and technology. Some are festivals, residencies, some operate mostly as venues, but what they have in common is that they operate on a network-based model and are all responsible for igniting and shaping new ways of creating together, and kind of maybe formed what we can call now, or a lot of copying or reworking of the models that they have created as multidisciplinary approaches to kind of thinking together in these areas. So these institutions are selected for their specific programs that are multifaceted, co-creative, and stimulate the entire ecosystem that evolve together, and most importantly, undertake the role of a new type of learning resource system, we can say, that offer interaction, skill development spaces, opportunities that deal with subject matter in a non-classical way. We're talking about residencies, seed funds, incubation processes, commissions, productions, performances, and many other events that these programs all include diverse formats, aside from utilizing new digital tools or new technologies, are based on conversations and inquiries on the future of technology. And they serve as one big connected neural network for the critical analysis and the ideation of what comes next. And I feel like this is what makes these people very special in regards to their positions within the industry, but their also positions globally. And during this panel, we'll focus on diverse approaches in response to the obstacles that have been generated by this period, basically. For example, how has the coronavirus shaped their formats and relationships with their ecosystems? This is kind of the bigger question that we will be proposing. So I'd like to begin the conversation with Barry. Hello, Barry, and thanks again for joining us.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Can you tell us a little bit about Gray Area and its civic impact-oriented approach for those who are not familiar with the foundation, and maybe share with us the most observable shift that it's gone through in this period?
Well, I would be delighted to. Thank you for asking. Yeah, so Gray Area is about a 12-year-old organization in San Francisco, which I think is important context to help understand it, us and what we're doing. And we're really trying to explore the notion of what a countercultural organization looks like in the 21st century. And we do that through an approach that really takes the arts as being a functional way of helping to translate between a lot of different sorts of interdisciplinary practitioners working towards working through the arts to apply their collective sort of knowledge and efforts into helping create particularly now, new ways of forming kinship and caring for communities, but also applying their knowledge towards some of the world's most complex challenges that we can bring this sort of collective human knowledge to bear on. And so we do that through, we have a large venue theater space in a historically Latino cultural district in San Francisco. It's a very modular space, so it's a theater with flat floor that we do public events programming, which is if you're in this panel, you probably understand audiovisual performances and exhibitions and things of that nature, conferences and symposia. We also have an education program, and so we have workshops all year round on various topics. A lot of them are, we integrate art, science, technology, and the humanities all in the sort of coursework we're doing, and also try and highlight topics that are important towards how we ethically apply those practices towards the world. So, social justice topics, tech and ethics, generally trying to gain a better understanding of the context around which, again, particularly in San Francisco, how we're developing, thinking about and deploying these technologies in the world, so that we can sort of use art as a way to change the whole ontology of how, from a San Francisco context, how we can stop being exclusively extractivist in our capitalist mentality, how we can stop exporting hegemonic ways of thinking about the world in, globally, how we can reorient ourselves towards a more relational way of being, knowing, and doing in the world, how we can listen better. So in all of those ways, we're offering an approach that takes people through inspiration through public events, creative development through education programs, and then finally, at the end, takes people to come through our programs and allows them to lead and inspire new generations of people that come through the space. What was the end of your question? You want to know how COVID messed us up, right?
Practically, yeah.
Yeah. So, it turns out that it's a lot less useful to have a 12,000 square foot theater space than it used to be.
Peki, şimdi deniyorum. Gördünüz mü?
And so the way that we operate it's a very, I don't know what the funding environment in the arts funding environment in Turkey is at the moment, but in the US at least, public arts funding is very difficult, and so we operate gray area very much like a business out of necessity. And so about 80% of our operating budget is earned income that comes from things like ticket sales and events that happen in the theater space. So of course, our last event was on March 6th and 7th, that weekend this year. And we were pretty prescient in the sense of, I immediately canceled all our events out through the rest of the year. And so that revenue disappeared immediately, and we've been kind of forced to try and find replacements for it. And a lot of that, as what's the other option? A lot of that has existed in the form of a online, pivoting to online and creating a series of various ways of doing online programming. I can just keep rambling on. Do you have anything in there that's particularly interesting?
Yeah, I think so, because in our previous conversation, you mentioned adjusting new ways of belonging, which was something that I liked, because you were talking about refocusing on close and local relationships with the organization's immediate orbit, you called it, forming much smaller groups that are mutually supportive. And you've told me that you have organized over 130 plus virtual events and had to kind of rework the business model into a donation membership kind of a model. And what you said really interested me in that was that you chose to host those events in internal open source encrypted platforms that protected overall data and IP rather than being producers of content for Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And yeah, I would like you to kind of elaborate a bit more of that local and the closer kind of rebonds that you've created and how that model has worked for you and why you have chosen kind of to go in that direction.
Yeah, so yes, that all sounds like stuff I may very well have said. There's a lot in there. So I'll start with the sort of community aspect. I mean, Gray Area is really a space that is supported and exists through, like any space, but I think in terms of support, even more from its community. And it exists particularly in a place like San Francisco that has vast wealth that's made it extremely hard for artists to live here anymore. And you know, the thing is that the technology companies here do not support independent culture in any significant way for the city. And so these technology companies try and build their culture. They silo it internally. And so if you see, you know, sometimes there will be an arts program at a major tech company, but it's usually bringing artists in to make murals on their campuses in, you know, Cupertino or whatever, the South Peninsula. And so what that means, you know, and it's great that there are artists getting paid through those means. And so it's not what is there that's the problem, but what isn't there. And what isn't there is a robust system of well-supported independent cultural spaces that don't have to struggle daily for survival. And so a lot of what we're trying to do is even keep sort of autonomous cultural spaces alive in this context is difficult anyway. And so the online pivot, yes. So we, well, I guess a little more on that is, so the most important thing, you know, everything's gone hyper local, right? Because there's no other option rather than to refocus in. It's sort of interesting that we've had this vast shift from being an entirely globalized, and it's not like we aren't, you know, the globalization is still there. Clearly, we're all existing off this global supply chain still, but in terms of sort of cultural events and things, we were completely on planes and global. And now this is forced everyone to refocus even more deeply on the sorts of personal relationships and community that are in our local area. And so it makes spaces, even when we can only do things virtually, it makes communities like the one Gray Area is supporting even more important to offer a space to maintain intimacy and connection in this sort of, in these times. And so one of the things that we did was, as we went online, it became very clear very quickly that for a lot of arts organizations, everyone had to rush to jump on making things for Facebook and Instagram and you know, Twitch, and we're on Zoom. And if we've learned nothing at this point, it's that in terms of the economy around arts, having artists be content producers for technology platforms that are controlled and create wealth transfer to the owners and controllers of those platforms, while at the same time those people are not focused on supporting the creative community that are their content producers, is a major problem. And so one of the things that we've tried to do and are in the process of is developing and self-hosting our own infrastructure for like community chat, for live streaming and serving of content, for video chat, for those sorts of things, so that we can give our community a more in-depth and engaged experience, and not have their data monetized, not have our students' data monetized, control who has access, and make sure that we're creating the best space that we can, that is supported by our values and driven towards the sort of goals that we envision to help develop this community towards. So I don't know if that.
Thank you so much. That was very insightful. I think also the fact that you guys are in the Bay Area, that also helps a lot with the awareness of what's happening with creatives and their.
The model in the Bay Area is there are so many people that want to replicate that. You have whatever in Berlin, it's what, Silicon Valley or something like that. You have these things all over the world where people think that this model, because it's generated such vast wealth, is something that's, clearly people want to replicate, the kind of economic miracle. But I think it's worth noting that the reason that this happened here is not because of like nice weather or, the ethos of the American West or anything like that. It's because there was a creative milieu here that happened in this, you can count from the gold rush on, but it's the 60s and 70s created an environment where this creative use of technology, through the ideas that were a lot of the ideas that were generated here, was able to develop. And so the culture preceded the innovation here. And insofar as there's a warning from San Francisco, as the culture becomes homogenous, drives out diversity, and doesn't support experimental and creative work, then that sort of extractive capitalist mentality of technology development will wind up, crashing down at some point.
Well, it's good to see kind of what the initial response to that has been, to protect your culture and local community around those issues. Thank you for sharing. Well, I mean, this is why we're doing it, so that they can hear about it, and hopefully it will inspire more to kind of approach issues towards that lens. And since we have been talking about kind of going back to local communities or just locality in a sense, I want to move on to Jose a bit, and thank you, Jose, again for being here, because another example of rebuilding local community might be that Sonar Plus T 2020 is going ahead with a hybrid version, an extraordinary edition, both digital and with events that will be held around the city of Barcelona. So maybe for the first time in 3 decades, Sonar Plus T's global participants will be mostly virtually attending the event. Can you tell us about the preparation of the program, or what that means for you?
Yeah, actually, of course, it's been an edition not resembling to any other thing that happened in the history of the festival, which at this point is quite long. It's 27 years. And actually, there is a certain return to the roots, because we are going back to the original venue of Sonar, CCCB, which we haven't used since 2011. And a reason for doing this was, like many people, in March we froze, and it became pretty obvious pretty soon that the festival would not go ahead in June as planned. Between March and April, we were working, as many other people, in trying to imagine that maybe the delay in it would allow us to do something remotely resembling a normal edition of Sonar Plus D, maybe in the early summer, as something that could have happened at the end of August or something like that. But at some point, we realized that we had to stop, like everybody, and then not just try to contribute to the fiction that we could go ahead in any way, shape, or form, but rethink pretty much what this year looked like. And for an event that always had this exploratory and almost laboratory quality to it, what was a huge logistical nightmare became the challenge of thinking, okay, let's try to think that every year will be different from now onwards, because the state of things will not guarantee or will not allow us to think in longer time scales. There is something pretty ironic that we kind of found pretty early. Sonar had happened since 1994, the second week of June. And for the first time last year, it was the first time that it didn't happen the second week of June. For a series of logistical reasons, it had to push back to July. And then, so this is the second year in a row that it will not happen the second week of June. And there could probably be a rationale that it will never happen again, because the time scales of decision, our capacity to operate with factors that will not allow us to plan or to operate in business as usual may perfectly be here to stay. And we are all aware of that. There is, to me, the elephant in the room is not so much COVID and what we all have been doing. The elephant in the room is there's a historical cycle that maybe started, and we may discuss it later because we may have different perspective on this, in the early 90s, maybe. And that historical cycle is coming to an end, or has come to an end, which is kind of nice also to me, because 30 years, it's kind of like when we start historicizing things, now we're starting to write the histories of the 90s in many fields. Maybe this is sort of like also a sign that a specific historical culture cycle, in the relationship between creative practices and arts, technology, and how it created an industry, is arriving to an end. So many other festivals in the city, for instance, started programming concerts in other shapes or forms throughout the summer. There was a certain big mentality of, we cannot do things as usual, but it's important that we insist on doing things, because we are not going to disappear, because that's a statement on its own, not disappearing. And for us, the answer was try to think in terms of, let's go a little bit back to the past, in the sense of how did we do things when we started, and looking at the dimension that implied in terms of not reconnecting, because of course we had never left them behind, but looking at the communities in the city, but also recognizing, and to me this is the potentials of the local, digital, presential, non-presential dimensions, that we are all clusters in networks of conversation, of cooperation and collaboration, of solidarity. I mean, I'm now looking at the screen, and on the top of my screen, on the left is Olof, with whom I have worked uncountable times. On the right is Lalin, with whom I've counted uncountable times, and has actually taken Sonar to Istanbul in many ways. So these networks of collaboration and partnership and kinship and solidarity are no less real than our relationship with local communities. They are as important and as valuable, and they have to keep on being as valuable for the future. So the experiment that we're going to be doing in 12 days from now, in 17 and 18, looks at least like three kind of like elements. One is, how does an event turns into a platform of visual content that is globally distributed, that is asynchronous. This thing about becoming I hate the word, content provider or a video platform, but it seems to be the best thing that we have. which, by the way, a lot of people have been talking about digital events, and most times when they were saying digital events, they were meaning basically AV broadcast. And that was something that was making me a little bit frustrated, because that's a very specific language, that's a very specific technology, and digital event should mean something different. So the other one is the digital event. And then the third one is that we're gonna still be gathering our local community as much as we can. As of today, is between 50 and 75% of capacity at CCCB. It's going to be a free event, which for us, I think, was one of the best ways I could go to give back. In every session, there's going to be people on stage and people somewhere in the world joining us. There's going to be artists all over the world, some of them who have been sending us their work. Many others are going to be physically there with us. In a way, it's not going to be a normal Sonar lineup, but there's going to be many artists of the ones that we love and respect and we've worked for the last 20 years also taking part of this. And I can't wait for announce the whole thing in 4 days. And 3 years ago or 4 years ago, we stopped using the word festival, actually. And we were today discussing what could that mean, as you make a transition or metamorphosize into a platform of production of knowledge, a platform of establishing these forms of collaboration and making and creating possibilities for the artists that we want to support to exist in as many platforms, in as many different countries, and through as many channels as possible. And maybe just to round it up, if we have one big challenge now, is that we all knew that the logic of big events, and Sonar is at 120,000 people a year event. So that logic of big events has big possibilities and has huge potentials. I love the capacity to create this temporary autonomous zone, this bubble of community where people are for 3 days assume or adopt that the rules of engagement are different, and there is a huge potential there in establishing a space with its own rules of engagement just for 3 days in this temporary bubble. But at the same time, we know it's very problematic. Like, we're putting a lot of CO2 into the atmosphere. We are feeding into dynamics that are having externalities that are not desirable at all. So I think our big challenge is why staying within or keeping within what is important about experience as a medium and the experiential as a language of community building and partnership and kinship in physical spaces as something that is incredibly productive, not only in intellectual terms, but also in emotional and in affective terms. How do we decouple ourselves basically from the non-desirable effects of the tourism and hospitality industries, which we have been, of course, coupled with for many years in different ways. And I think that in the same way that, for instance, the art market has a very strange model of funding knowledge production, and I'm meaning here the contemporary art market, which funds knowledge production by creating artificial scarcity that allows for dynamics of speculations for the people with too much disposable income. I think we can also think in a way of funding and fostering and producing knowledge and aesthetic experience, decoupling ourselves from the non-desirable urban logics of gentrification, mass tourism, the hospitality industries, something that has changed definitely for worse. Cities like San Francisco, cities like Amsterdam or Barcelona, definitely. I don't know if you think that Istanbul is at that point, but there's a possibility to rethink ourselves, recognizing these problems and reimagining how do we fit within, keep on fostering and stimulating and making possible the production of knowledge, of affective partnerships, of kinship, of collaboration, and of community.
Well, that's amazing, because I was going to ask you how we experience festivals, or like the I don't want to use the term economy, but the experiential economy, and what that future will look like. And you've already kind of given me answers on your points of view, because in terms of what you're saying, it is really, even though I haven't lived that time frame with you, it is really interesting to be feeling as a community that the ways in which we were making business, or the ways in which we were operating our organizations, are now feeling, or have been feeling off, and this kind of crisis has emerged as an opportunity kind of rethink them, and to replace them, which I think is very very valuable. I will come back to you, Jose, at the end, because I'm really interested in your opinion in terms of how will that evolve into the future. But I do want to ask you like one very quick question. It's interesting for me that, you know, Sonar Plus D could make that leap of faith, right? When everything was being cancelled or paused. And I see that personally in differentiation to, for example, other music festivals, that it has a lot to do with the community that you've built over the years, or even just as a digital tool. And as an example, the Sonar Plus, the app, for example, which has created tangible opportunities, and, you know, allowed me to find people who I share beliefs and visions with, and actually literally helped um, my personal and professional growth. And I just want to ask you, um, how do you see Plus D kind of taking that leap of faith in terms of community? I feel like that foundation has really helped you, you know, enabled you to do that. Is that correct?
I don't know if I have an answer for this, and I don't know if anybody has an answer for this. Because we are like figuring it out. I mean, I think that there's something in our community that is very lucky, and maybe it's not the same in other communities, which is that the links are very intense, the exchange of information is very fluid, and the spaces for conversation tend to be quite thriving, you know. With the big caveat that, as Barry was saying, many of them are captioned and are actually, we are hosting those conversations in spaces that we do not control, that promote politics that we do not support. But we are not special in that sense. I think that almost everybody is kind of like stuck in those series of parameters. But to me, that is kind of like at least among the three more important things that we do. We do. By us, I don't mean Sonar Plus D, I mean all of us, our community. It's like almost research and incubate, like the idea of community incubation, that actually practices can be fostered and can be experiments can be run in terms of their feasibility, and then practices can be built and supported, and then one day you have changed one way of doing things because you have joined the dots and watered the plants for a long enough time for things to happen that couldn't have happened otherwise. We knew kind of like which is the way in which we used to do it. And by the way, I think it's very tempting, and maybe we can discuss this later in the discussion, making big, huge prediction proclamations. We don't know what is going to happen, you know? Like, I don't trust any point of view that is based on very bold predictions. So let's not try to like hypothesize how things that we were doing are not going to be feasible anymore. I think that many things will still be feasible. Others will be replaced by other ways of doing that we won't even notice. And we may be deeply nostalgic for things that we used to do that we don't really do anymore. But it is my concern, or like my main concern also right now, is in this exercise of exchanging a series of ways of doing by we will do it digital, we will move digital, fooling ourselves thinking that this is an exercise that can be simply done without paying a price for it, or that in this act of replacement, you know, we are not paying the same price that we're paying by realizing that this situation is really nice, but it's not the same as when we have done this looking eye to eye, sitting around a table in the past. It's obviously not the same thing. So we're not going to be able to to create the same kind of forms of practice in communities throughout these mechanisms without deep reflection about what works and what doesn't. When are we actually doing too much of, and what are we not? When are we accepting the rules in an uncritical way? When are we just simply putting out there in the world an amount of, almost like the fiction of doing so much that we will create like a fake mirror image that things are operating as normal. And I think we're still a bit stuck there, you know? I want to see where we are 1 year from today, because we are still trying to operate the levers and pulling the mechanisms by the ship is still going ahead. Well, maybe it's not a ship anymore. And at some point we will have to sit down and talk about it and recognize it for what it is. And it will be hard and it will be difficult. But I feel it's just a question of time.
Well said. So I'd like to move to Vero. Hello, can you hear us fine, Vero?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. How are you? It's so nice that you were able to join.
Thank you. No, it's really, really a pleasure to be here with you guys.
And for people who also have just tuned in or doesn't know Stochastic Labs, this is Vero from Stochastic Labs, a program that has a high residential element to it, as you've told me, and operates outside of the traditional institutional frameworks and focuses on creativity and tech ventures, I can say. But can you, Vero, tell us a bit more about the labs, its mission, and what kinds of people you host there and why?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really a delight to be here with Barry Through, who is fundamental and really just fantastic at Gray Area, which is another place here in the San Francisco Bay Area where Stochastic is located, that is dealing with some really similar themes, though in a very different way. So basically, Stochastic's mission is to create new heroes in the Bay Area and to support a conversation about the future of technology in the Bay Area that we feel is really critical. We do our best to bring creativity to the forefront. So we support a lot of hybrid characters, people who identify at once as an artist and a technologist, or perhaps an artist and a scientist, or even an artist and an entrepreneur. And to bring people together who are working along those intersections for a conversation that we find has a common spirit, a common heart, and yet manifests itself very differently in these distinct realms. And it's important to do this work here in the Bay Area because we need to challenge these sort of existing archetypes that we're seeing in tech that, choose metrics of success, for example, that are things like the IPO. Technology is a deeply, deeply human endeavor. So is art. And to a certain extent, Stochastic wants to take that back and to say, we are supporting these interesting, eclectic, hybrid, passionate, creative engineers to identify as artists, to put their creativity at the forefront of what they're doing, and to create a new kind of ecosystem around technology here in the Bay Area that will hopefully lift us all up.
Thank you for that. I like it when you said that it's a very humane business technology. I think we have long forgotten to kind of perceive it as such. And that actually brings me back to some of the projects that's been going on, or ventures that were in progress in Stochastic Labs. We were able to kind of try out or experiment with beta versions of that during the pandemic, as if they were almost designed for that particular time. So in that sense, some ventures being developed there were already resolving obstacles from the future. And I don't want to say it like a big obstacles, but even the obstacle, let's say, of this virtual space that we're right now in, and how it's kind of devoid of echo, or our physical relations to each other, even though it will never be the same in virtual spaces as in physical spaces. There are elements that can be added to make that much more humane, which brings me to, you know, Asa Raskin's Makespace, which you have introduced me to, and we have met and had discussions there. And that makes me want to ask or maybe comment on how, even though your operations have paused due to what's happening everywhere and travel bans, but they were still able to kind of create impact and stay beneficial. Would you elaborate on that a bit more and how that program is designed to kind of keep on giving, even though it's not able to, in a sense?
Sure. Well, so, you know, Stochastic operates on a few different levels. One of the things that we do that we enjoy doing the most here in the Bay Area is we bring people together literally for private and public events. One of which is a large public event called Reclaiming the Future, where we open up the invitation to the audience quite broadly here in the Bay Area. And others are smaller, more intimate gatherings that we have in our beautiful space here in Berkeley, where we bring people together to have these conversations between experts in different fields and emerging voices in different fields, to sort of ask these critical questions in a way in which they can do so behind closed doors as well. So all of those things have been suspended temporarily, which is always difficult, especially during the summertime, which tends to be the height of activity for us for the year. But Stochastic also does something that's a little bit unique, unfortunately unique here in the Bay Area, which is that we actually provide housing to folks who are going through our programs. And that has been, for us, a total blessing during the pandemic, because I often think of the pandemic as sort of like this strange, or the beginning of the pandemic as this strange moment of like musical chairs, where wherever you were in the room, you sort of had to sit down there. And Stochastic was really lucky to have just a fantastically creative, dedicated, just beautiful group of human beings who were here in-house at that moment. We did lose one, unfortunately, who happened to be Turkish and who was in Turkey at the time. But the others stayed on. And you know what we've learned from that experience, and I think we sort of knew this before as well, is that, you know, here in the pandemic, where survival is sort of front row and center on everybody's agenda, you know, just taking any worry about that out of the equation for somebody who is operating out of the context of the traditional career path is really fundamental. You know, if you put a roof over the head of an artist, then that artist is freed up to really apply themselves in a way that they may not be when they're just, you know, so focused on having to, you know, get work, etc. And so, you know, that has been really wonderful to be able to continue doing that through the pandemic, and also to create a natural community for a group of people who otherwise might have been really quite isolated from each other. And the themes that they have been working on have all, each one transitioned to sort of like a pandemic version of itself, which has been really beautiful to see. So, you know, for example, you're talking about Makespace. Makespace was in development before, you know, the musical chairs moment, and Makespace couldn't be a more appropriate tool for this moment that we're living. And, you know, I can talk a little, would you like me to talk a little bit more specifically about that?
Yeah, please. Yeah, please.
Sure. So, you know, Asa Raskin is a fantastic resident here at Stochastic. He is one of the co-founders of the Center for Humane Technology, which asks a lot of these questions, which I brought up before about, you know, the future of the human voice within the technology landscape. He also is a founder of the Earth Species Project, which looks at artificial intelligence tools and the possibility of bringing them to understand the natural world in a new way, specifically around the notion of translating animal languages. Makespace is sort of I think an answer to this frustration that we are all feeling about how our live video feeds and these static rectangles in these new meeting environments feel very kind of constraining. And Make Space really flips that all on its head and allows you to have a more sort of embodied, to the extent that one can be embodied in a digital world online experience of conversation. It allows you to navigate through your conversations with other people through spatial audio, and also to do this really great thing, which it's very much in beta right now. So forgive me, Make Space creators, if things have changed in terms of your terminology, but a concept that I really love, which is called face docking, which allows you to literally sort of like put your face onto a shape or a piece of information or into a room that you are sharing with other people, and it's really wonderful. It allows you to kind of get out of these classic constraints, and in the same way that just regular human interaction in an interesting architectural space or a garden or a museum or even just the urban environment allows you to have kind of like unexpected moments and unexpected encounters. There's a little bit of that is captured in Make Space, which I find really wonderful because it's nice to have surprises. What would we do without surprises in our interactions?
Yeah, it was very fun to be a part of it. I also liked particularly how the developers allowed sound to travel through the virtual environments. I think it's one of the platforms and mediums we have been pushed into and forced into considering more than usual. And so I feel like for the future, but just as Jose said, like something has to culminate, and that breaking point is still not there yet. But still, all of these experimentations, I think, are very valuable in terms of how we identify ourselves, or how we are able to communicate with each other, or what parts of physical aspects that we would like to integrate to these virtual experiences, or that we would like to keep just as physical. So I think there's a lot of values that we're coming up with, kind of like new sets of parameters for the way that we want to exist in the world. And so thank you, Vero. I will continue with Olaf, and I will kind of like continue from the virtual environments thread as my first question, because I have so many questions for Olaf. Because I know you've been working heavily on new virtual projects and thinking towards a virtual presence, an alternative future that we might maybe depend on it, but also aside from necessity or not necessarily depending on it, it might be creative, it might be free and inspired there. So it would be wrong to attach those efforts to the pandemic, because I know that today's art festival has been archiving a lot of virtual VR or browser-based experiences of installations and audiovisual performances, which is something that we don't see quite often, to be honestly, and exhibitions that we still can go back to and visit because of the organic nature of the subjects that you've been dealing with. This is something that you had already done. But I guess I want to ask you, how did you see your community or audiences reacting to that archived content? Or as a person who's already been working in virtual environments, how the pandemic or this like shake that's happened in 2020 shifted your perception towards it? Like, how does Olaf think differently in the subject now?
Well, it's I think that the change is quite radical in how things are even evolving. I would say it's a schizophrenic roller coaster even. Like I remember 6 months ago when all this started, of course, already a lot of ideas came up, and we were looking like, what were we doing before this? And this will probably never happen again. So immediately we started looking, what is our past? What is our history? How did we archive our project? And we realized that festivals are very ephemeral. They come, they go. You spend quite a lot of energy in building it, and that inspired us to digitalize our content, not only the shows and these kind of things, but really if we made an exhibition in an old factory building, we tried to make it three-dimensionally visitable in the future. So actually try to archive the spaces as well. When the crisis came, when the pandemic came, I was like, oh fuck, now we're gonna be super local, and that's really what I don't want. I'm very sorry for all the globalization, anti-movements and everything, but my work is about connecting. And we were doing that around the world, in Mongolia, in Bhutan, in Nepal. And actually when every festival or every organization was a bit like, okay, let's at least try to have our content online available. When this started to happen, 1, 2, 3 months, you see the live streams, you see that actually the attendance is still quite low. Maybe the urgency is not there, because you can, when you watch a show, you are there, you have the physical experience, but when you watch it at home, you have distraction, you don't have that you really have to be there live. On the other hand, I heard feedback from my partners and friends in Nepal. They were so happy that all these festivals are now going hybrid, because now they could attend, they could watch. The other day there was CTM having a club night in a digital environment. And I was chatting with him in Kathmandu, and for them it was really like, we are opening up our content. And then it made me realize how important it is, like to still try to use this online platform, and not in a traditional way like we were used to do it, but to try to have a different kind of experience, and even a different business model. Like we are used to pay a ticket to attend the show. What if you consume this content online? Is it kind of a next flit experience that you're a member of something, and how do you still engage in the sharing of knowledge and ideas? It changed quite a lot, because you saw a lot of ideas going in one direction, even ourselves. And actually the biggest luxury we had is that we didn't confirm anything at that time. We were still like completely open. We were in the process of funding our upcoming edition. And when things evolved, I decided to actually keep this open space in front of me, because we all realized like it's gonna take a while. And I don't feel the necessity to go back where we were, or what we were doing. I think it's a topic that we had nine as a festival theme. It was the theme of conflict, and the sub theme was conflict is the beginning of consciousness. You see in the history, the big great wars, after the wars, there was a rising consciousness. People were like, okay, this never again, and let's rebuild. I think we are in one of these massive conflicts right now, and maybe it's sometimes not even hard enough, because we're still like, okay, let's get back to what we were doing. And I actually recently gave up doing that. I will not do a festival this year. I will not do what we were doing. I want to take time, and for the first time in the 18-year cycles that I founded Today's Art, there is, it's an annual cycle. You have to continue, you move on. And for the first time I realized like, wow, this is the first time we cut this cycle, which doesn't mean we cut our community. There's still all these people around the world, and we still have a little bit of budget. How can we use this budget otherwise? How can we still connect and share this knowledge? So with our partners I visited before the pandemic. I went to Bhutan, and I met an artist community there, and we are trying to set up an educational program with technology. Probably this will be very much online right now, and no physical kind of exchanges. But we still need to continue this, and I feel very motivated in that sense, and also very concerned about the community we work in, because I see also quite some careers changing. Here recently in Netherlands, they announced that the clubs will not open soon. I see some young emerging DJs that are starting to do something else. Normally in this time of year, my office will be full of freelancers working on the festival. They are not, my office is empty. I actually rent out desks to people who are working in ministries, and they are fed up at working at home. So they are joining us in a creative space. And my head of production and the technical producer helps me renovating my house right now. So we have a different kind of economy. And on the other hand, and that's more a local thing in the Netherlands. The funding cycle in Netherlands is every 4 years you can apply at the Ministry of Culture or at your own city. We have been in this cycle of funding for the past 12, 15 years, I think. And now we have been rejected by the city of The Hague for next year and the coming 4 years. On the other hand, we have a very positive advice from our Ministry of Culture, but we are in one of the big cities, so the budget is not distributed here, it's distributed outside. We still have to lobby a lot, but our future as an independent festival is very, very thin and might not even continue. So it's time to really rethink what we were doing. And what are the things we have around us, like what is this community about, and how will this evolve and take time. I really want to take time.
Well, thank you so much for really being sincere and open about all of this information. I think it really helps for people who are listening in, or for even us who have our own personal financial or organizational struggles, to kind of hear that we're going through similar periods, and to be open about that is just really, really amazing. And yeah, it is very interesting. And also I think it's good, kudos, that you're not necessarily trying to make it happen, and you have allowed for a kind of time of reflection that will probably, if we all know you, will come up with the greatest thing ever very soon. So that is also good to kind of know what next approaches are, as you were talking about Bhutan. So maybe you feel that there's more value in reaching out to places that maybe were reached out less than usual. And that
Well,
I'll
I think,
also bring.
next to this, I mean, on one hand, this world became very connected, but on the other hand, look at what's happening even beyond the COVID-19 crisis. Look what's happening in Belarus. Look what's happening in Gaza. Look what's happening in Mali. And I think, culture especially is the last bridge we should burn. So as much as possible, we should try to connect and stay connected and create. I think especially artists, I have a lot of expectations that we will have quite a strong reflection on all this, and that we will have very powerful art coming out of this, and great music. And
I think so too.
Yeah.
And that also brings me to your theme of trust. And I want to, because it was today's Arts 2020's theme was trust, and I want to quote your website here. Trust is the feeling that somebody or something can be relied on. In this crisis, we are challenged with trust in governments, trust in media and science, but also trust in each other. Trust is the bridge between the known and the unknown. And yeah, this is very touching, to be honest. And this brings me to the element of this period that I'm most passionate about, and I want to ask that to you, is how to deal with mental health and heal the fear that we have been faced with as a society. So in these terms, what do you think will take to educate audiences, take care of all precautions necessarily, but also somehow eradicating the fear that's ingrained with it?
Well, maybe trust is for me, it's a very important kind of topic that we started even before the crisis as a topic for this year. You know, what's our trust in machines? What's our trust in governments? What's our trust in our fellow human beings? You know, it's fascinating what's happening. Like there was a lot. There was this period of we discussed truth and post-truth, and suddenly we all trust our governments like blindly. What they say is what we will have to do. We trust the pharmaceutical companies blindly. They will come with a virus or with a vaccine. We start to shift in our trust as well. But I think it's important to still keep it somehow in each other and on the planet we live in. And like I said, I think culture is a very powerful tool to still communicate with our fellow human citizens around the world. And really believing in the good side of humans, I think this crisis will make us rise in consciousness. Yeah, maybe we still need a strong global liberation movement to knock down the old structures. I still see right now that the whole world is kind of locked down on top of the corona crisis because of the American elections also. So we need to get rid of these different structures. And I think trust will help us to get there. Trust and also trust in each other to see a different perspective, because we tend to look everything from our own kind of perspective. And I think this will happen even more when we are more in our local environments. Yeah, so online and internet and staying connected is for me very important.
Thank you so much. That was such a nice note to kind of begin ending this panel, because it's our last 10 minutes. And I kind of want to ask everyone, because everyone has mentioned that it is, generally speaking for all, it's a regeneration period, but maybe the regeneration hasn't started just yet because we still kind of have to be hit with some truths or really know which way that we can go to, because things are still happening around us and it's maybe too early to you know, determine a course of action, if we can ever determine one. We're all kind of in the flux of things and getting more and more comfortable, I guess, staying in that flux, and that is becoming our strength in a sense as a community. And the fact that we can stay connected and think together. I mean, there's some people here, like for example Vera, which I've never met physically in my life, but I have been talking for hours and hours and hours for the past 6 months. That's been kind of, you know, like a kindred spirit, but such a support system that I can be inspired intellectually, but also emotionally be supported through what has become this global family that likes to think together and help each other out. And that's very important to get through that. So the last thing that I kind of want to pose to all of you as a question is, what is that thing that you never want to go back to? Like what that this process helped you identify, basically. What's that thing that's like, no way, that's out of my life, never coming back?
Good question.
You can say anything and anybody can pitch in if they like.
You know, funnily enough, I'm not sure if I have anything like that. I think in terms of what we're doing here, I think for me, this situation hasn't been as much of a disruption as it has been an acceleration. It's like we immediately got into a time machine and went 5 years into the future over the course of a week. And so it just laid bare all of the issues that were there anyway, so we can see it very starkly. I mean, in terms of how we're living, certain sorts of environmental impacts, supply chains, how the economies working necessitates all the travel. There's a ton of things, and everybody knows sort of like the slate of issues that are forefront in our mind, you know, social justice in the US particularly, different sorts of politics. It's all just kind of there, and the situation this has forced us into has just made it extremely clear. And so in the sense that we were looking for ways to think through and address all that stuff anyway, I think it just, for me, deepens the commitment to, for the sort of work we're all doing together towards thinking together globally about this stuff, and really strengthening the bonds of how to support this community, you know, and I talk about all of us when I say that, because I really think that having this sort of hybrid interdisciplinary community focused on how to create a better world and life for everyone is the only option out of this, you know, a lot of these messes. It's this kind of thinking is a necessary tool to help us make progress. And so would I change anything? No, I mean, things have gotten, a lot of let's put it this way, a lot of the things that I identified as like problems before have just become more starkly problems. And so it hasn't really changed my thinking as much as like made me more committed towards making sure that we're orienting our activities towards the right spaces, I guess.
I was thinking that the problem to answer that question is that most of the things that I really miss are very deep, and many of the things that I don't miss are pretty shallow, you know, like are like small annoyances, you know, like super long meetings with 15 people that never end, or some business traveling, although I do miss traveling a lot, like especially some cities, which to me are part of my sentimental emotion. But actually I was thinking that if there's one thing that I don't miss is that I don't think that is viable or tenable, sustainable anymore to sort of having a specific vision of innovation and what the role of innovation was in the social fabric anymore, you know, and especially its connection with entrepreneurship, its connection with the startup logic as a very specific mentality, because we deal with specific conversations and with specific communities, and because we have a specific, of course, kind of attachment and intersect with the specific areas of the tech sector and of the entrepreneurial world. It was supposed that we had to have common values and keeping and sharing a specific form of dialogue with some of those spaces, which actually are very much opposed to our approach to life, the world, and actually are deeper goals. So honestly, I really hope and expect that we're never coming back to entrepreneurial circus. I think we've left it behind forever. I hope.
That's a very particular and identified hope. So let's see about that.
I don't know if it's but
it's
I
well,
agree.
I
It's
mean,
all these small annoyances that you know, for example, a full train or traffic jams, these things you see less, and that's cool.
Yeah, for me, I think yeah, office space for sure, and not reading books. I've just kind of been perceiving time, acting out differently, and I've been kind of able to manage my time much better. I have learned through this process. Thank you everyone for really participating, taking the time here, and also for reminding me what beautiful families I have and we have, you know, all around the world. Thank you so much for this. And so we're ending the panel. If anybody wants to add one last thoughts, we're kind of out of time. Is that okay for you guys?
I was just going to say in response to the last question that, you know, here in the US particularly, and I would say, I believe definitely through our conversations in this global family, that there's a new kind of honesty that is emerging when people have felt the rug be pulled out from underneath them. And, you know, they no longer have to speak with such filtered voices when they have so little to lose. And that's something that we've really seen here with all of this violence and tragedy here. And so, you know, I just hope that we never go back to our filtered realities, our heavily filtered realities, and that we're able to, you know, just support each other, to stay honest globally, locally, as much as we possibly can.
Thank you. I won't add a word to that. End of panel. Thank you so much, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you, guys, and hope to see you in person very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation, and good luck, everyone.
Good luck.
Good luck.
Ciao, guys.